What's up, my friends? It is once again Dr. Remy LeBeau coming at you from the X Lair. Hey, X Lair. I have something very special today, of course. I mean, is that a surprise to anybody? It is the retro Cyclops statue by Bowen Designs, produced in 2002. This is the statue of Cyclops, and probably what I think of as his most iconic design. This is the design of Cyclops that was the second sort of evolution of his design as a character, uh, following the original costume design that he first appeared in X Men #1, with Jean, Iceman, Angel, and Beast. Uh, a little bit later, Jean decided to recreate the costumes herself, you know, via the storytelling. Somebody made her do this via the writing. I'm pretty sure it was actually I forget who it was. The point is that Jean redesigned the costumes, and this is the costume that she designed for Cyclops. Cyclops then went on to have this costume for an extremely long period of time. I think like over 100 issues, and I think the only at the point that he was redesigned was the point at which I think he joined X Factor, and up until that point, he had this costume, and so a lot of really important stuff happened during that time. Like there was the giant size X Men moment, and sort of the expansion of the X Men team into like this more diverse and what I think of as interesting team. Including Colossus and Storm and Banshee and bringing in Wolverine and Sunfire, Nightcrawler. Just taking the X Men to like a new era and a whole new level. I kind of feel like this was the time period that sort of elevated the X Men to sort of the legendary, iconic hero status that they now have and forever will have. Before that, I kind of felt like they were sort of, still trying to come into their own, kind of defining, who the X Men are as characters and sort of finding the right audience. I mean, there was a period of time in which Marvel stopped printing original stories and just kind of started reprinting some of the old issues from the original run. And so I think it was from the Giant Size X Men moment forward that they finally began to burgeon into like the superheroes that we all know and love today, and hold of equal status to some of the DC heroes, Superman, Batman, that had already established themselves as iconic and legendary before the X Men even came into being. So this costume thus represents that most important era of the X Men, and so for me, it is just emblematic of you know who the X Men are at their core, and why it is that I love the characters and why it is they're so important to pop culture and just to fans around the world. Um, of course, the best story to come out of this era was the Dark Phoenix saga. Superbly awesome story, and that you have the iconic cover of Cyclops holding Jean in his arms. And it looks like she's dead, but she actually wasn't dead. That wasn't the issue in which she died. It was like the issue in which she was neutralized after becoming the Dark Phoenix, and it was like the transition to the final chapter of that story where the Shi'ar come in and they demand her to be executed, and so the X-Men have to fight the Imperial Guard on the moon, and it was all like very dramatic and awesome, and that cover with him holding Jean is sort of that is sort of an iconic representation of that really important storyline, and and of course he's in this costume, and I it couldn't have been any better. It couldn't look any better. So super important costume, super important look. So this statue was created in in sort of like a two version set. I mean, I think that it was actually released as a set, but they were actually released individually also. So there's a variant of this, which you can actually see. I think it's like back here leading my 90s X Men display. It's the variant of this is the Jim Lee era Cyclops costume that we've seen in the classic cartoon in the 90s, of course. And it, and it's a cool statue without a doubt. I love it. Obviously, it fits in perfectly in my 90s era display, but I like this version better. I don't know what it is. I think maybe it's the simplicity of the costume. Um, I don't know. It's just there's something about it that just kind of stands out more to me, and kind of maybe I just like the design better. I like the simple design of like the dark costume over most of the body, and like the really great like sort of physique sculpt. And this is done. This was done by Randy Bowen. It was done by classic sculpting means, so non digital. And he did a really great job of sculpting the entire like musculature and the anatomy. Everything about it is like on point, and it just reflects like true talent in Randy Bowen's ability to sculpt and create these pieces like without without needing like all the bells and whistles that one might now employ in order to create like impressive statues. Like this statue, very simple costume, only a few sort of somewhat complicated details to it, and yet it's super impressive, and probably, I don't know, in my mind, probably the best Cyclops statue that Bowen Designs has released. Even though they've released some other good ones, there's like five statues they've released: the X Factor statue, the modern statue, the original costume statue, and of course the Jim Lee era statue. And I'll of course feature all of them in a video in the coming weeks, but individually. But I mean, for some reason, I really love this one the most. Maybe in part it's because it was one of the first statues I bought. It was maybe like number five or something. It was in a time when I was only buying one statue of each character. And and actually this was before Bowen released the three variants of the digital sculpt that were released maybe in the last 2 years, which include the original costume, X Factor, and Astonishing X-Men versions. So the only two versions that existed was this version and the Jim Lee version. Of course, I chose this version. I preferred it, um, and maybe because of that, like somehow like I feel more connected to it. But I think it's just overall like it's a great sculpt and it's a great design. It's a great costume. Everything about it is great. The visor, I love the visor. It's kind of like thick and it's got a thick slit. The face, all the features, the nose, the mouth, the teeth, the tongue, like it's all sculpted very well and painted well. And then beyond that, you've got just like as I said, like nicely sculpted physique. The gloves, like the difference between the arm and the gloves, there's no there's no actual like sculpted line there. It's just like the only thing to demarcate it is like different paints, which works really well. Now you see a lot of sort of like sculpted lines that are intended to emphasize the difference between one aspect of a statue versus another, be it like a skin versus costume or costume versus glove or something. But here, I mean, the only thing that was done was just different paints, and like that works. And I never once thought, I can't believe he didn't sculpt in the edge of the glove or something ridiculous. Like I've always just accepted it as like a really good choice, a really great statue in every detail. So what that goes to show is that you don't need too much to make a great statue, and a great statue can be simple. Um, it, so just beyond like the details I've already mentioned, it's got the really great X belt with like the rectangular X, which I love. I love that rectangular X. It's got the granny panties on the outside, which it's just a classic sort of superhero feature that now has sort of like died off a bit, which is actually ultimately good. But as far as like just it representing an earlier era of comics when superheroes were first invented, and they kind of did have like these underwear on the outside, and it was that was just sort of like traditional ultimately as far as like the design of the characters and who the superheroes were, I guess. somehow reflecting who they were. It works. It works really well. So that looks great. And of course, you've got the tight leggings, and then you've got the big yellow boots. Everything done really well. Looks awesome. Um, and then, of course, the very cool X base, which is a staple for X Men statues. Basically, most X Men statues for Bowen Designs releases. But what's really unique about this one, and something that I haven't seen in any other X Men statues, is that he decided to make most of it red, and only the X emblem black with the cutouts red. Usually, you'll get like an entirely black base with the cutouts red to kind of emphasize, that aspect of the base, and kind of make the X stand out, which is really cool. I love that. I think it looks great, but I really like that this one is mostly red, and I think what it reflects is sort of the more playful nature of the overall design of the statue, being, as I said again, like part of an era where the designs were more playful, because that's originally how the designs were. They were intended to be just sort of fantastic, because these characters exist in a fantastic world where things were not as they are in the real world. You know, after the 80s, where you had like kind of the success of the Superman movies, and then the 90s with the Batman movies, and then, Marvel finally getting into the game, it became obvious that the companies producing these characters wanted to sort of ground the designs in reality a little bit more in order to sort of connect the mediums and thus draw in fans from um, the various versions of the characters. And this is a smart move, and ultimately not a bad thing. Like, I like the designs that have come out from it, but it's great to sort of honor like how all of this started, the original designs, and I think that because you're going to have a character design in a statue form from an era that reflects that earlier time where comics were a little bit more pure in a sense, sort of untainted by sort of corporate desires to like make as much money as possible from them. Like, I love that. I don't know if Randy Bowen did it on purpose or not, but like the Red X does kind of capture that the fun, playful aspect of this design. And so kudos to that. Um, I think that pretty much concludes my video of this very cool statue. Actually, I did want to mention one more thing. This statue is not that expensive. I think when I bought it like 3 or 4 years ago, it was about maybe $100 to $150, and it still is. Uh, and I think the reason for that is because there were 2,000 of these made. This was made in 2002, 11 years ago. But there were enough made that there are enough to go around, because there were three more Cyclops statues made recently, and because other companies have also started making Cyclops statues, I think people are more inclined to sort of make trade-off decisions about what they're willing to keep versus not, because of space limitations, because of budgets. So I think when people buy other Cyclops statues, like, they tend to maybe get rid of one or another. The point is that this statue is available to people that might be looking for a Cyclops statue. It's a really great Cyclops statue for as a standalone piece, as a piece for someone that maybe doesn't have too much money and might be interested in maybe getting one or two statues just to kind of get your feet wet and just kind of have something to enjoy in your home that is beyond like just your comics, that represent like the X-Men in in a way that you can honor you're probably like your fanatic love of them. So if you're on a tight budget, this is one of the statues to get. It's not just a statue that's not that expensive. It's actually kind of a gem in the entire like spectrum of what you could potentially get. So it's a great deal, and you'll be very happy with it. Um, to those that are looking to make a team display, of like 70s era giant size X-Men display, he is just like a perfect leader to that display. I mean, the stance is like aggressive. It basically has him asserting himself, uh, in a battle stance, and it's a perfect sort of centerpiece to a a display of like the 70 eras X-Men. Um, and of course, like, you could have like him be the leader of any X-Men display. It doesn't necessarily have to be of that particular era because of the way the statue is sculpted. Um, it does, he can just lead any group. It doesn't need to be a particular thematic, tied group, because he's again like a very impressive standalone piece, and he can be used in a variety of ways. So don't feel like you need to get an entire set for this or a particular kind of set for this. Like, he's a great statue. He'll work in any display. If you like Cyclops and you're just a fan of the X-Men, and you have some cash or you don't have that much cash, this is definitely a statue to get. All right, so that actually does conclude my video of this very cool statue. I've got plenty more videos to go. I've got 4 more Cyclops statues to show you, as well as, like, I don't know, maybe 40 to 50 other statues that deserve all the attention I could possibly give them. Thank you so much for checking out my video and my blog and my channel, and I will be bringing you much more stuff. I hope you enjoy the higher quality videos that I'm finally able to produce. And as always, X in the box, because ain't nobody checking me. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.